Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about something that you might not think is all that interesting.
Mm,
But trust me,
okay.
it's a really big deal, and that is rare earth metals.
Yeah, those are pretty important.
Yeah, they're kind of everywhere,
Mm.
but we don't really think about them very often, and today we're
Yeah.
going to talk about how they're connected to
Uh-huh.
the war in Ukraine and the future of global power and technological leadership.
Right. All connected.
Yeah.
It's all a big web.
It is, we've got a ton of sources today. We've got news articles, we've got geopolitical
Oh,
analysis, we've
wow.
got security agreements. So
Cool.
we're going to kind of untangle all of that for you and figure out what is going on.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that, this isn't just about technology. The war in Ukraine has really just kind of thrown a wrench in the whole system.
Right.
And it could totally reshape who controls these essential building blocks for, well, pretty much every advanced technology that we rely on.
Right. So before we even get into Ukraine and all of that kind of geopolitical stuff,
Yeah.
remind me why these rare earth metals are so important. I know they're in everything,
Yeah.
but what makes them so special?
Well, you're right. They are in everything, everything. And the name's a bit misleading. It's not that they're rare.
Right.
It's that mining and processing them is incredibly complex and, to be honest, kind of a mess.
Oh,
Environmentally, it's not a clean process, and that's where the problem comes. And one country basically has a monopoly on the whole process.
and that's China.
Yep, that's China. So that phone in your pocket, those solar panels that you might have on your roof,
Uh-huh.
their affordability, their existence,
Whoa.
it's all tied to decisions made in Beijing.
So it's like we're all just completely hooked on all of this tech
Right.
that relies on these elements, and China's the one who's holding the supply line?
Pretty much.
That sounds a little...
It creates a vulnerability, especially as technology becomes more and more intertwined with economic and military power.
Okay, yeah, so that's not great. And that's where Ukraine comes in, right?
Mhm.
I was reading that Eastern Ukraine has a bunch of deposits of these rare earth elements.
Yeah.
Who knew?
It's true, and that's what makes the region so strategically important. I mean, this conflict adds a whole other layer to this.
Yeah.
Imagine if Russia wins and gets control over all these deposits.
Oh.
Then suddenly the West is in a really tight spot.
So we're not just talking about territory, we're talking about who controls the future of
Yeah.
technology.
Potentially, yeah. Access to these metals could become heavily restricted for Western countries, and that would impact everything.
Wow.
Imagine a future where there's a trade embargo on rare earth metals and it just cripples the electric vehicle industry.
Oh, God.
Sets back the fight against climate change, or a world where technological advancements are just stifled because the key ingredients are locked behind political barriers.
I was not expecting this conversation to get so dark so fast. Okay, so what are we doing about this?
Yeah.
I saw some articles about the UK, stepping up and supporting Ukraine, even signing a new security agreement with them.
Yeah, this agreement is actually super significant.
Okay.
It's not just sending weapons, it's intelligence sharing military training, even helping develop Ukraine's own defense industry. It's a long-term commitment to make sure that they can resist pressure from Russia.
That's interesting because there are elections coming up in the UK soon.
Oh, right.
I wonder how that might affect things. But okay, stepping back a bit.
Yeah.
What about the rest of Europe? They've been backing Ukraine too, but things seem kind of shaky over there.
Yeah, there are some strong headwinds for sure.
Like what?
Well, we're seeing a rise of populism in some European countries, and some of those movements are very skeptical about sending more aid to Ukraine.
Oh.
You mentioned the UK elections. Well, the results of elections across Europe could have a big impact on how united the EU can be on this.
So you mentioned Slovakia and the Netherlands. Are those isolated incidents, or is that a sign of a wider trend in Europe that could undermine support for Ukraine?
Right. What are the consequences?
Yeah.
That's the million-dollar question.
Okay.
We're not just talking about abstract geopolitical maneuvering here. This is about the resources that power our world, the technology we depend on, and ultimately the future we're all creating. The stakes are high.
And this is where it all gets personal, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about global power struggles. But how does this affect everyday people, like our listener?
Right.
If Europe waffles on Ukraine, What does that mean for them?
Well, it could mean that all those cheap Chinese-made electronics that you rely on could become like a luxury item,
Oh, wow.
or they could vanish entirely as new technologies are locked behind political barriers.
Gosh.
It could affect your job, your access to information, even your ability to live sustainably.
Okay, so we've established that things in Europe are like a little tense. Let's talk about the U.S. They've been Ukraine's biggest supporter. But with the 2024 election coming up,
Right.
well, let's just say there's some anxiety in the air.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the different stances on Ukraine within U.S. politics are pretty stark.
Yeah.
And look, we have to remain neutral here,
Of course.
but the potential policy shifts under a new administration are impossible to ignore.
I think it's safe to say that a potential return of a Trump administration has a lot of people worried
Yeah.
about what that could mean for Ukraine and for like this whole power dynamic that we've been talking about.
And rightfully so. I mean, a reduction in U.S. military aid, for example, could have a ripple effect across the whole conflict and embolden Russia and China. It's
Yeah.
a very real possibility that we have to consider.
So basically the future of Ukraine, the balance of power between global superpowers, access to these crucial rare earth metals, it's all tied up, and the U.S. election is like the knot that either tightens or loosens the whole thing.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, so that's a little scary. Um, what are some things that the West can do, like right now, to try to mitigate these risks, besides just holding our breath and hoping for the best in the upcoming elections, which honestly is a bit stressful?
You're right, that is a bit stressful. Well, there are a few key strategies that Western nations could pursue, like diversifying supply chains is essential.
So diversifying supply chains is really important, but isn't that kind of a long game? What can we do right now in the immediate future to counter the leverage that China and Russia already have?
Well, you're right.
Okay.
Diversifying does take time.
Yeah.
It means investing in mining and processing operations outside of China, exploring new sources for these metals and maybe even finding ways to create substitutes.
So basically we need to like stop putting all our eggs in the China basket.
Exactly.
Okay, but that sounds like a pretty tall order, especially with the lead that they already have.
It's definitely a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. The European Union, for example, they've already started initiatives to boost their own rare earth production and rely less on China.
Oh, okay.
The U.S. is taking similar steps, but, it's still pretty early.
Okay, so like there are things happening,
Yeah,
but they're going to take time.
right.
So what about like more immediate actions?
Well, strengthening alliances and partnerships with like-minded countries is crucial.
Okay.
Imagine a network of countries all working together to secure access to these metals and to counter the influence of China and Russia.
So like a strength in numbers kind of approach.
Exactly.
I like it.
Yeah.
But not every country is going to be on the same page, right?
Yeah.
We've already talked about populism and potential policy shifts in the U.S. and Europe. So how do we deal with that?
That's where I think clear and consistent messaging from Western leaders is really important. The public needs to understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about some obscure metals. This is about the future of technology jobs, our way of life. We need to move past the partisan bickering and focus on the bigger picture.
You're right. This isn't just some abstract political game. This has real consequences for people. Speaking of, let's bring it back to our listener. What's the takeaway for them? What should they be paying attention to?
Well, I think the choices we make as individuals and as a society, they're going to have a huge impact on the technology we'll have access to in the future. Staying informed is crucial. Understanding what's going on, the potential risks, the different policies that are being debated, it's all part of making informed choices.
Okay, so read the news, do your research. What else can people do?
Supporting policies that encourage diversifying these supply chains and strengthening international cooperation. That's a big one.
Okay, how do you actually do that?
I mean, this could mean contacting your representatives, supporting businesses that are trying to source these materials ethically, or even just being a more conscious consumer.
So actually checking where the components in my next phone come from, making sure that my electric car battery isn't contributing to some environmental disaster on the other side of the world.
Exactly. Those might seem like small actions, but if enough people start demanding transparency and accountability, it can really make a difference.
Okay, I'm starting to see how my individual actions can actually fit into this bigger picture.
Yeah.
But I got to be honest, it's still a little overwhelming. It's hard to see how my choices can really matter when we're talking about these huge global power struggles and resource wars.
I get it. It's easy to feel powerless when you're facing these massive challenges, but remember, millions of people making small choices, they can have a ripple effect.
Okay.
Never underestimate the power of collective action.
So what you're saying is don't give up hope.
Exactly. The future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, both individually and as a society. By getting involved, demanding accountability, and making informed decisions, we can steer the world toward a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone.
I love that it's a message of empowerment. But before we wrap up, I have to ask, if you could leave our listener with one thought, something to really chew on, what would it be?
Here's a question for you to ponder as we become more and more reliant on advanced technology. How can we ensure that the resources that power our world are sourced ethically, sustainably, and in a way that benefits all of humanity?
That's a big one. It makes you think about the responsibility that comes with all this amazing technology that we just kind of take for granted.
It's a crucial question and one that we need to keep asking. This conversation isn't over.
I think that's a perfect place to stop. For now, we've covered so much, from smartphones to global power struggles to the ethical sourcing of rare earth metals. It's been quite the deep dive.
We've really explored this complex web of factors that are shaping the future of technology and access to these critical rare earth metals. It's a lot to unpack and it can feel overwhelming, but it's essential knowledge.
Absolutely. And as we've discussed, we're not just passive observers in all of this. We have a role to play.
Staying informed, getting involved, and demanding better from our leaders and the companies that control these vital resources, those are the keys to shaping a better future.
Well said.
Yeah,
I think our listener has a lot to think about.
I hope so. This is just the beginning of the conversation.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dives. Thanks for joining us.
Wow, we covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
You did.
We talked about rare earth metals, a war in Eastern Europe, and the future of technology. Who would have thought they were all connected?
It's honestly mind-blowing. I feel like I just mainlined a whole semester of geopolitical science and tech analysis.
Right.
Okay, so let's break it down for our listener. What are the key takeaways here?
Well, first off, we need to stop thinking about rare earth metals as just another commodity. They're
Yeah.
the fundamental building blocks of the 21st century. They power everything from our phones and our laptops to electric vehicles, renewable energy, even advanced military tech.
And because of that, they've become a central piece in this global power struggle. China's dominance in production has created a vulnerability for the West, and the war in Ukraine has just magnified that even more.
Exactly. And that's why supporting Ukraine is so crucial.
Yeah.
It's not just about territorial integrity. It's about preventing Russia and by extension China from gaining even more control over these vital resources.
Right, but as we talked about, that support isn't a given. The rise of populism in Europe and the upcoming U.S. elections have added a whole layer of uncertainty. The potential for policy shifts, reduced aid, even a complete 180, it's all on the table.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why it's so important for everyone to be informed and engaged.
Yeah.
Understanding the issues, the risks, the potential consequences, it's all part of making of those informed choices, both as individuals and as a society.
So it's not just about being aware of the problem.
Right.
It's about doing something about it.
Exactly.
What are some tangible actions our listener can take?
Well, one of the most important things is advocating for policies that promote diversification of supply chains. We just can't rely on a single country for such essential resources.
Okay, so contacting your representatives, pushing for legislation that encourages domestic production, exploration of alternative sources, those are all good starting points.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of being a conscious consumer,
Okay.
Do your research before you buy that new phone or electric car.
Mm-hmm.
Find out where the components are coming from, what the company's stance is on ethical sourcing, and, support those that align with your values.
So it's about putting your money where your mouth is, literally.
Exactly.
But sometimes it feels like these individual actions are just drops in the bucket. How can we as individuals really make a difference when we're up against these massive global forces?
I know what you mean, but remember, even small actions multiplied by millions of people can create a wave of change. Demand transparency, hold companies accountable, and support leaders who prioritize sustainable and ethical solutions. These actions can have a ripple effect, shaping the market and influencing those policy decisions.
It's about reclaiming our agency, recognizing that we're not just passive consumers of technology, but active participants in shaping the future. And that brings us back to the question you posed earlier, the one about ensuring that these essential resources are sourced ethically and sustainably.
Right. It's a question we all need to grapple with as we entrust more and more of our lives to technology.
Yeah.
We have to be mindful of the systems that underpin it. Where do the materials come from? Who profits from them? Are these systems designed in a way that benefits all of humanity or just a select few?
Those are some deep questions. There are definitely no easy answers, but like you said, asking them is the first step.
Exactly. And the more people who engage in these conversations, the more pressure we can put on those in power to create a more just and sustainable technological future.
Well said. I think this has been like a truly eye-opening deep dive. We've explored this complex relationship between rare earth metals, the war in Ukraine, and the future of technology. It's a story that's still unfolding, and it's one that affects us all.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of our world and the responsibility that we all share in shaping its future.
So to our listener, we say stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. The future is in our hands.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And remember, knowledge is power.